Hi everyone, and welcome to our show, Unconditional Love from Our Animal Friends. I'm your host, Ken Lawrence. A little bit about what we're going to be doing with this show. This show will focus a lot on the world of pets. And not only dogs and cats, which many of us have, but also animals such as reptiles, lizards, snakes, birds. And we'll be interviewing a lot of different people to get different perspectives on our pets. We'll be talking to veterinarians, people that own pet shops, animal psychiatrists, as well as even groomers. So we'll be covering a lot of different topics, some of which you've probably heard of before, others you may not be familiar with. But we hope you find it very interesting and also a lot of fun and very informative. So anyway, for today's show, I'd like to welcome a very special guest, someone I've known for a while now, and that is Dave Gordon. Dave, how are you?
Good, thank you, Ken.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you again.
Dave is the property manager for the Hillside Acre Animal Cemetery located in Methuen, Massachusetts. And Dave, before we get started, you and I have known each other about 8 years.
Yes, we have.
Believe it or not.
Yeah, goes by fast.
It really does, since we were about 25,
Yep.
I think, in dog years. But I do want to say something. I've had animals buried at that cemetery for many years now. And your staff, you do a great job there.
Thank
the
you.
place looks pristine at all times.
Thank
It's
you.
a beautiful, beautiful place. Thank you for the job that you, Glenn, and Eric do down there.
We do it for you. We do it for our clients.
It looks beautiful down there. But before we start, though, tell me, Dave, how did you end up being a property manager of an animal cemetery?
Sure. It actually started with my son. My oldest son did an eagle project for the MSPCA. I was actually unemployed at the time. Helped him do the project, and when he went to report back to the people at the MSPCA, they said, "Wow, who's the person who laid out our horse paddocks for us?" So he's like, "My dad." And they're like, "Well, we're hiring. Have him come down here." That was like in the summer, like June, July, when we actually did the project. And then finally, in December of '03, I was hired too. I was actually hired as just a maintenance person. And the reason I became a properties manager was April of 2004, my boss and myself went out for surgery the same day. He didn't come back, I did. So here I was as the properties manager.
Well, glad to hear you do a great job there.
Thank you.
Okay, the Hillside Acre Animal Cemetery. Again, a lot of people may have heard of animal cemeteries. Some people don't know a lot about them, and some people like, what are you talking about? I've never knew anything like that existed. About the Hillside Acre, can you tell us where it is and actually who runs the cemetery?
Yes, we are located on 3 Nevins Road, which is the intersection of Route 213 and Route 28 in Methuen, Massachusetts. We're affiliated with the nonprofit organization, the MSPCA, which our main building is across the street, but the cemetery is located over there, across from the police station also in Methuen. And
how long have they run the cemetery?
Cemetery has been there since 1917. Way back up on the hill. It's a 4-acre lot. Way on the top of the hill is site number 1, which it's really hard to see from the main road, but once you walk into the cemetery, you'll see the sites of the first original 1, 2, and 3 way up in the corner.
It's real unusual. That was, like I said, 100 years ago, and it's hard to think that people not only buried animals in a cemetery, but there were headstones there, and it's quite a setup.
Yeah, it is. I lived in Methuen most of my life, and I never knew it was an animal cemetery. And you go by and you see the different types of headstones, and you wonder about the stories. Now that I work there, I get to see and hear some of the stories and the different names, and you tell at different times of what people name their pets and how much love they show with the epitaphs that they have on their headstones.
Right. It is quite a sight there, especially when you see some of these headstones back from 1917. When you think about it.
Yeah, you just think about the times in World War I and everything, and the cost associated also. Some of the headstones are much larger headstones, which people probably just bought them all at once because they saved money to do that.
Okay, true. And on that topic about people buying the headstones and the plots, there's quite a few plots there that we see where people obviously bought them years ago when maybe we weren't considered as trivial as we are today, for lack of a better word, that it was kind of unusual to go ahead and purchase plots and land and everything at an animal cemetery.
Yeah, because you never really knew back then how the animal cemetery would actually take off or how long it was going to be there. So I believe the reasons that the people bought these headstones was to have their plot of land for the many animals that they would have throughout their lives. I mean, many people say, you know, my animal passed away, I'm not getting any more, but we all end up getting more animals. So I think the size of the headstone, they prepared for the future of more pets that they would have in their lives.
And some of the headstones there, like massive in size. I can imagine what those must have cost back then.
Yeah, back then. Yeah, some of them are, I mean, right now we have a limit as a 2 foot by 2 foot headstone, but some of those headstones are 3 feet and 4 feet wide and 3 feet high. So yeah, I can imagine what the cost of granite back then was for these people. But I'm sure at some point they saved money by doing that, rather than having to buy more and more headstones each time an animal passed away. So they were cost conscious and did it all at once.
I noticed that probably a few doctors bought headstones back then.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
People of means were able to do that.
Yeah,
You know?
Again, the times, knowing, you know, the war and the season and the years it was, so yeah,
Right.
the more affluent did that.
And actually, just to backtrack for 1 second on that, the cemetery itself was established in 1917.
Correct.
You had mentioned that. And at the time, was all the land at once purchased, or has that expanded through the years?
The land was actually donated by Harriet Nevins, who was a big name, one of the 3 big names in Methuen. And the land was actually where the cemetery is right now and the farm across the street. So all that was donated, and for whatever reason, we decided to put a pet cemetery in. It was at the far corner of our property, which was roughly 150 acres. So that's where the cemetery ended up over there. Then progress came, highways came, police stations came. So there's that slight division of where our base is at 400 Broadway. And then the cemetery is at Nevins Road, but it's roughly 2 minutes away from where we are, with progress and streetlights.
I was going to say, there's highways. And, you can almost picture maybe 100 years ago, might have been a horse path or two, but
yeah, one big field,
Yep.
because they used to do their own hay and their own for all the animals, because it was a functioning farm for horses. This is what it really actually started out as. It was a rest home for horses. So all those fields were hayed out to feed the horses, and then keeping the cemetery as an option for all the animals.
Sure. On that note, I mean, when people think of an animal cemetery, and it's very common, I'm sure most of the animals there, you said there's over
18,000
animals buried there. The bulk of them are dogs and cats, probably.
Correct.
However, and you were just talking about horses, there are horses buried there, and I know there's certain rules you have now about that, if you can talk about that.
Yeah,
a little.
we actually have one full body of a horse buried in there, and it was actually one of our Board of Overseers horses that was like 30-something years old and passed away, so they did a full body burial as a favor to him. But after doing that and realizing how much space and equipment it took to do that, they said that we could no longer do full body burials for horses. But we do have other horses that are buried there. They were cremated, and they're buried, so they take up a lot less space. We actually have 2 race horses that were cremated a couple years ago and buried at the cemetery.
Mile Range and Let's Run.
Yes.
And we're showing the picture to our audience right now. The bridles are
The bridles are on there.
are on
It
there
just
too.
shows the love that it doesn't matter what the animal is, you know, horse, dog, cat, lizard, like you said. It's just an unconditional love for the pets, and people really take pride in their pets and the cemetery also.
Yeah, that's what struck me when I was there, and when you see the dogs and cats that are buried there, and you see like little toys and everything, it's like, okay, that's a dog or a cat. But then when you see something like for a horse, you don't kind of think of it that way, but you see the bridle, and so yeah, these animals were loved by their owners and respected.
Yeah.
You know, not only during life, but in death also.
Yeah. Size of the animal doesn't matter. It's just the love that is created between owner and pet.
I take it the horses are the largest animals
Yes.
I don't see what else
that's
you could
correct.
have there right now. But
That's correct.
just never hurts to ask Dave there
True,
to
yep.
find out, about things like that. And I know one of the first times I was there, I was amazed when I saw something else that was interesting there, a grave with 2 monkeys.
Yes, Mrs. Brown and Charlie Brown. The very interesting story with those 2 monkeys are, the only thing we could actually do at the time was just open the site. The people who were the owners of the monkeys wanted to do everything themselves, so they actually put the monkeys in the caskets, they actually did the burial, they actually filled it in, and that was it. They just didn't want us to be a part of it, which was fine, because we pretty much allow people to do what they feel is right for them, within reason. So that's the interesting part of those monkeys, is we really didn't do anything. And they have a nice headstone right now that has, Mrs. Brown and Charlie Brown, and it's always, you just always chuckle when you walk by it. Charlie Brown, the monkey.
Well, that's what caught my attention when I saw Charlie Brown. And like you made a great point, though, like you said. People with their pets, it's what they want to have done, basically almost like humans. Certain things that they want done at the time of burial, for whatever reason. And the same thing with the pets. And like you said, with the monkeys, they wanted to do basically the whole thing themselves, with that. In addition to the monkeys, there was also a headstone there that caught my attention. Had to do, we hear this all the time about parrots, that you have to be careful when you buy a parrot, because you may be willing that to your children and possibly grandchildren. And I think there was an example of that.
Yes, we have Polly the parrot that ended up 92 years old, was born in 1845, passed away in 1937. You think of the times of back then of what happened, where people were ill and sick and potentially dying from common colds, but yet here's this parrot that just keeps getting passed on, and you wonder how many generations of people it was passed to before it actually passed away and died and was buried at the cemetery.
Right.
It just, again, when I first saw the headstone, I thought it was a mistake, and I went back to the records and checked, and it's like, 92 years old. That was a shocker for me. Yeah. I've heard of parrots, 30, 35 years old, but that was a shocker.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's true when you hear people say about be careful when you buy, and there is proof, and this was back in the 1800s up until 1937 that parrot lived to. Yeah. So any of our viewers who are doubters about that, beware, that could happen.
Yeah, if you get a parrot, be careful.
Yeah, be careful. And don't say too much to that parrot, because he may tell a secret after you're gone to your kids or whatever.
Absolutely.
And that could also happen. So, but also, in addition to the dogs and cats and horses and long-living parrots, a lot of people have small pets, they hamsters, whatever, or gerbils or guinea pigs. And I know there's a special section there for that also.
Yes, it's called the small animal burial area, and we actually thought of it because we were getting a lot of calls for people to purchase a lot for their kid's pet, which would be the hamster or the gerbil, their very first animal. So what was happening is we were telling them what our cost was for a regular site, and it was just too expensive for them. And being a nonprofit, we wanted to try to help everybody, help the community, help people. So we came up with the small animal area, which is just a single burial itself, and included with the cost of that is a headstone. So we made it more personal for a first-time burial for, say, younger children with their first experience of having to deal with death. Because we've all had the hamster, the gerbil that we had, and something happened, and we needed to bury it somewhere. So, and it's really done pretty well, and it's very efficient for people that just want to do that one burial site for that one cost.
I think, like you said, a lot of times the children, this is the first time they're dealing with death, and that's a very nice gesture when you have an area like this. And so a lot of times these small pets get buried out in the backyard or whatever, and again, people do what they need to do. Yep. But this, for people who want to do this, and for their children to come back and see the site, even years from now, where they may take their children, and to show them.
Yeah, we see people coming in the cemetery all the time with little kids and walking around and checking out the different headstones. And you're right, correct, because if it happened as when the kid was 7 or 8 years old, he can come back as an adult with his children or grandchildren eventually and say, here is, my first pet that was buried here, and it's a lasting place. We're going our 100th year next year, so we've been around, and I don't think we're going anywhere. So it'll be there for people to see in the future.
Just like Polly the parrot. That
Polly the parrot
didn't go anywhere for
nope.
92 years. So anyway, what we sometimes see in the news today with our soldiers overseas is many of them have dogs who assist them, whether it's bomb sniffing or whatever. And I think a lot of people realize that at the animal cemetery you have some war dogs actually buried there.
Yes.
If you could talk a little bit about the war dogs, especially Butch, for instance.
We actually have 9 war dogs buried at the cemetery. And Butch was another interesting story. Talking with Joe Mullen, the person who used to work there for 45 years before I started there, what had happened with Butch is nobody realized he was a war dog, a war hero, and he was just, when he passed away, he was just thrown away at the dump. And somehow the worker at the dump knew Mr. Mullen and knew Mr. Mullen was in charge of Hillside. He ended up finding out the information about Butch and called Mr. Mullen and said, we should honor this dog and bury him in our cemetery. So he was buried. The society, being the MSPCA, we actually paid for the headstone for Butch because we didn't have an owner or didn't have anyone around. So to honor him, that's what Mr. Mullen did, and that's what the MSPCA did.
That's great. The other, there's another burial there. I remember you had showed me, kind of a special burial where the owner had the pet buried in a special place in his locker.
Yes, Buddy Thomas, he actually buried the pet in his foot locker from the war. So again, just showing you what a pet means, what an animal means, what the dog meant to him. You hear about the stories from war veterans now, and the dogs where they're really their partner and they're with them all the time. So I guess it's his way of honoring his dog and burying it in his foot locker.
And one other one there that quite a bit of history on, Corporal Derrick.
Corporal Derrick, the Doberman, yes. I actually, when I first started there, I communicated with the owner. She was actually out in California. We were writing back and forth because I wanted to hear the story. Pretty good sized headstone. It had all the American flags there, so I was just curious as to what the story was. Tracked her down, and Corporal Derrick was originally was their family pet. When the husband went into the war, he took the dog with him and had it trained to be the war dog, the sniffer, the sniffing out and sniffing out bombs and bodies in the enemy. And when the dog, when the war was over, they wanted to get the dog back as their pet, and the government didn't really want to release that. So the woman, she petitioned all the senators and whoever she could, and finally got the dog back. And the interesting stories with Corporal Derrick is when the war was over and he was back here, she finally had him. He would attend parades. He would have his own cart just to himself. So you picture a train and all these rail cars and whatever, and he would just have his own nice little coach and ride comfortably to all the parades and celebrating. So I just thought that was really a nice show of emotions for the dog and being able to celebrate how special he was at that time, saving lives. I mean, you think about a dog that's over there, you wonder, well, what is he doing? He's actually saving lives by sniffing out bombs and what have you.
I know you do have a special, a new section at the cemetery for the war dogs in the up the front section, but there's a dog in particular. I had the honor of attending the funeral for Corporal Max.
Yeah, Corporal Max. The area that you're talking about was, we got together, we collaborated, myself, my staff, and our volunteer, and we wanted to do something to specifically honor the war dogs and have a specific area. We wanted to be one of the cemeteries that, instead of just having them buried throughout the cemetery, we wanted to have a specific area. So we came up with this area, talked to a local headstone company, they donated the headstone. Finally, this woman, Pam Pelton, wanted to honor her dog and not just have him put anywhere. So she got in touch with me. We arranged the burial. It was actually Flag Day of 2014, and it was great. We had someone playing taps in the bugle. We had the Methuen police dog. We actually invited them. He came to the cemetery. So we just wanted to have that professional dog touch to it. We had about 50, 60 people It was really touching. Joe Mullen actually presented the woman, Pam, with the American flag. So we allowed her to put Corporal Max in there. And it was just a very touchy day, special day for her. And she was just so excited to be able to have him someplace where everyone gets to see Corporal Max's headstone and what he was and what he did.
I know real fast, just the rest of that story is Pam was adopting a dog that day from the shelter across the street, and she went over there, and the dog she was adopting already had a name, and the dog's name was Max.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
coincidence.
It really was.
Yeah, she has him now, and he's called Max too.
He's Max too, really. But also on the premises, there's you have the administrative building, but way in the back of the cemetery, there's a small white building. And if you could talk about the person who had that building, Mrs. Dodge.
That is Mrs. Dodge's mausoleum. And again, talking with Joe Mullen, who was there at the time, Mrs. Dodge was from Wellesley or Waltham, in that area, and she would take the bus to Andover at the station, and they would go pick her up over there. And when Mrs. Dodge came to the cemetery, she would have her 2 little bags by her side that she would put down, place on the ground by the mausoleum. She would take everything out of the mausoleum, clean out the mausoleum, make it all nice, and then put everything back, and then take whatever content she had in the 2 bags, put that in the mausoleum also, and then she was ready to get back on the bus, have a ride back to Andover and back to where she was. Nobody ever really knows what she put in there.
And sometimes it's best that we don't know.
Yeah, it's her special whatever she did, and it's her special
Exactly.
thing that she did, and we honor it, and we have a key for the door, but we don't touch it. It's there. And
It was hers.
Yep, it's hers.
It was hers on that. That's interesting. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, you talk about Mrs. Dodge. A lot of people don't realize this about Hillside Acre. There are actually people buried there also.
Yes, people's remains. It obviously has to be remains, just by the size of our lots. And since I've been there, there's at least 12 people that have been cremated and buried with their pets. And since I've been there, many more that have said, how do I do that? Because I want to be buried with my pets, which again shows you the unconditional love between pet owner and pet. So yeah, many more. And the only thing I can tell is just make sure you put that in your will, because once you pass on, who knows what's going to happen. So if it's in your will, and I could say there's been at least 15 more that I've met that want to do the same thing. One of them is our volunteer, Kathy, who she has pets buried there, and she wants to be buried with her pets.
Yeah, becoming more and more popular, actually.
More and more popular, yeah. There really are no rules and regulations against it.
Right, unlike with human cemeteries, there are rules
Yes.
surrounding it. I know there's a few exceptions of people trying to make exceptions or sections, but with the pet cemetery, as long as you're cremated, you can't be put there.
Their final destination is the cremation, and they can be buried there.
One of the other things about the cemetery I noticed is there is a 9/11 connection to the cemetery.
Yes, there is. Marie Papalato was on one of the planes that hit the World Trade Center. And her daughter, Maria Kootenai, we see her all the time. She's been a good donor for us. The thing with Maria is she adopts a lot of older pets, older sick pets that otherwise would have been euthanized. So she has a lot of burials in there. And unfortunately, Maria can't make our celebration that we usually have because it's right around the September 11th. And this year she won't be there because she has to go to New York to be involved with the celebrations or the memories they have for the 9/11.
Right. I had the pleasure of meeting her. Very, very nice lady.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, she really is, and a real animal lover, and does some great things for pets
she
and
does.
everything. Yeah, so which is good. One of the other things we did want to just touch on here as we start to wind down is the pricing. I think a lot of people are curious. Okay, it's an animal cemetery. How does this all work as far as purchasing plots and to do
Sure.
that?
Yeah. The MSPCA being a nonprofit, we have different prices, and the prices for the small animal area that we talked about is a fee of $500, which includes a headstone. So that is actually a pretty good deal for the first-time pets. A regular burial lot is $700, which includes opening the gravesite, the cost of a casket, closing the gravesite, and perpetual care. We do not charge an annual maintenance fee. And then if you already had a site with us and you did another burial such as yourself, it's a $350 reopening fee for that. And again, including the opening of the gravesite, the casket, closing, and perpetual care. Our volunteer Kathy is the one who waters all the flowers. So even this year, she's been there twice a day on weekends, even dragged me down there a couple of weekends.
To do that. I must say, years ago when I had my first pet buried there, at the time it was my mother who recommended that we buy additional plots, which we did. And since then we have had other pets buried there. It has made the process a little easier. It's a tough time.
Pre-planning is something good, and we have that now. People are pre-planning because it is a traumatic time when your pet passes. There is no good way that your pet passes away, whether it's put down or dies in its sleep or whatever. Peaceful if it dies in its sleep, but it's still traumatic for the pet owner because it's just it's a shock. And if you have everything all prearranged, that helps. People do it now with their prearrangements, so it makes it easier on the family. Yeah,
it really does. I mean, I know every time I go there, even though it's been years, you do get choked up, and
it's tough.
We love our pets.
Yeah, we do, and it's it's a nice place for people to be able to sit and remember their pets.
No, it really is. Well, Dave, we're getting toward the end of the show here. So much information, and I want to say thanks for coming out here. I know you're a busy guy.
You're welcome.
And,
no problem.
And for making it here today. We really appreciate that.
So you're welcome. My pleasure.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, that's our show for today. Again, I'd like to thank the property manager for Hillside Acre, Dave Gordon. Also like to thank all of you for watching. And for my 3 pets at Hillside Acre, Shag, Roxanne, and Carrots, thank you for all those years of unconditional love. My name's Ken Lawrence. Take care.